Welcome to Just Asia, AHRC TV's weekly human rights program. These are the headlines. Violence continues in Nepal's Terai region. Hong Kong needs independent prison monitoring mechanism. India's Supreme Court asks government for roadmap for preventing farmer suicides. UN told not to let Burma become another Cambodia. Slow pace of constitutional reforms criticized in Sri Lanka. Welcome to HRC TV's Just Asia. I'm Jessica Fernando. This week, Just Asia begins with Nepal, where violence in the Terai region shows little sign of abating. Protests and killings have been occurring since 2015. In early 2016, more than 50 people died. During the March protests this year against a nationwide campaign conducted by the CPN UML, police started shooting to contain the situation. 5 protesters died while many others were injured, further inflaming tensions in the country. Although the situation was not entirely peaceful, it did not require police shooting. Despite the death of 5 Madhesi protesters and many being injured, the government permitted the CPN UML to continue their nationwide campaign. No discussions were conducted with Madhesi leaders or people. More people seem to be dying from bullets than natural causes in the Terai region. Unless discussions and dialogue are cultivated, there is a risk of Madhesi falling into a deep crisis. In Hong Kong, a community organization is calling on the government to establish an independent monitoring mechanism for prisons and detention facilities. At present, Hong Kong has no independent complaints mechanism for prisoners to air grievances, nor does it have a National Human Rights Commission. The internal complaint mechanism generally results in difficulties for prisoners or even solitary confinement. According to statistics, 1 person per hour is put into solitary confinement. Prison rules give wide discretionary powers to officials regarding this form of punishment, despite research showing that solitary confinement has adverse effects for rehabilitation. The UN's Committee Against Torture has also told the Hong Kong government to reduce the number of solitary confinement cases. Cases of physical abuse and assault against prisoners and others in detention facilities can also be addressed by an independent monitoring body. Just Asia speaks to Annie Lin from the Society for Community Organization for details.
So what we do here in SOCO is to focus on some of the problems that prisoners face and try to see how we can advocate for policy changes or legislative changes. There are lots of different issues. I think one of the core issues that we think are important, one of the core issues that we think is important here in Hong Kong is the fact that, for instance, solitary confinement is used really widely in prisons, and we've looked at the statistics, and there's around 1 person who is put in solitary confinement per hour. So the number of incidences is really big, but the problem here in Hong Kong is that when you look at the law, it gives so much discretion to the officers that it can be used whenever the officers like, basically. Because the prison rules refer to the fact that you can put a person into solitary referring to security and order of the prisons. And that's really a wide, it gives really wide powers to the officers. Now we are advocating for solitary confinement to be used as little as possible and only in cases where you cannot find any other alternatives, because we think that solitary confinement is it has a really negative effect on a prisoner's mental health, and also because it actually reduces the chances of rehabilitation, because the long-term effects of solitary confinement has already been proved by lots of doctors and medical professionals, lots of scholars. What we see now is Hong Kong, even despite the fact that we have already told the UN about these issues, and the big problem is that the UN has already criticized the Hong Kong government on this issue. So if you look at the concluding observations from the Committee Against Torture, it says, Hong Kong should reduce the amount of should reduce the number of solitary confinement cases and only use it as little as possible. It's still going on. So it's not like that the Hong Kong government is not aware of the issue. What we're trying to do is to advocate on the issue, and for instance, we talk to legislative councillors and hold press conferences and also expose cases. So this is one of the issues that we've been working on. And there are some other issues in regards to when a person wants to complain about whatever issues he or she has in prisons, then often it's quite difficult to do so without being punished for it. So you can complain. There's a complaints investigation unit, which is an internal mechanism. And then you also have the justices of peace, which is external. But when you complain internally or to the justices of peace, then often the fact that you are complaining or even just requesting something will be punished somehow, either through, for instance, putting you in solitary confinement or just making life really hard for that prisoner. So it's really difficult to voice out your opinion inside or just doing something which is a bit different from what the officers want you to do. So what we here ask for is an independent mechanism, independent complaints mechanism, or independent monitoring. So the problem here in Hong Kong is that we don't have any independent monitoring mechanism here in Hong Kong. For instance, if the government had signed up to the optional protocol on CAT, then at least the UN could come and visit detention facilities or police stations, etc. But we haven't signed up to that. And the government still hasn't set up a National Human Rights Commission, so we don't have that either. So that's why the whole system is actually not very independent. Now, justices of peace are, of course, independent, but the way that the justices of peace work is that they will go and hear a complaint from inside, but then they will actually just refer the issue to the Correctional Services Department. So it would be the same as going to the CIU, to the Complaints Investigation Unit.
India has seen a long spate of farmer suicides, with at least 600 suicides in the first 3 months of 2017 alone. In response to a public interest litigation, the Supreme Court in March asked the government to provide a concrete roadmap to resolve the agrarian crisis. The petition by the Citizens Resource and Action Initiative NGO demands compensation to families of farmers who committed suicide. The three-judge bench stated that it was not possible for the court to grant compensation every time a farmer commits suicide, and that instead the government must address the reasons for the suicides. At the end of last year, the Supreme Court had berated the government for a lack of national policy on these farmer suicides. While there are certain schemes available to help distressed farmers, the petitioner's attorneys said that these schemes were inadequately implemented to provide relief. Other experts have noted that rather than waiving off farmers' loans or providing price subsidies, the government should look towards minimum monthly income for farmers and improving district food self-sufficiency.
So basically the problem with Indian agriculture and the reason behind more than 300,000 farmer suicides in last 3 decades is that Indian government doesn't have a proper agricultural policy in place. It never had. So though there had been watershed events like Green Revolution, which did help Indian agriculture, but there was nothing concrete on the ground in terms of institutions. So 90% of Indian agriculture remains dependent on monsoons. If monsoon fails, your crops will fail because there are no irrigation channels. There is no public financing, no banking system available to the farmers. There is no system of compensation in place in cases of crop failure. So basically there are no public institutions. There is no public system in place. In fact, the tragedy of farmer suicides continuing in India is that it is one of the easiest things to address. Unlike in many other sectors, Indian government and Indian system has at least a revenue clerk present down to the last village. So what they can do means like they can start addressing the farming issues right from the beginning, when the cropping season begins, when the monsoon fails. They should be going for like supporting agriculture right from the outset and keeping a tab on unforeseen eventualities which destroy crop and all that. And they should have like put a banking system in place to cater to the needs of the farmer and to save them from the local money lenders. They should also build immediately and urgently an irrigation system that helps the farmers and removes their dependence, complete dependence on monsoon. Where will that monthly income package come from? You cannot sustain any profession, including agriculture, from quote unquote a monthly income package being doled out. You need to change the agricultural policies and the agricultural from the ground. The monthly income packages can be like helpful in that sense in the beginning, that until like the farmers come out of crisis, you support them with cooperative financing and so on, but it's not a long-term solution.
Moving on to Burma, in an oral statement to the 34th session of the UN Human Rights Council, the Asian Legal Resource Center called on the UN to not let Burma become another Cambodia. The AHRC firmly noted that Burma's justice institutions have no institutional memory of independence and professionalism, and even theoretical knowledge is lacking. Without these, they are in no position to assist the country to deal with the many layers of internal problems it is currently facing. The AHRC stated today that Burma has numerous judges who do not have a primary degree in law. Lawyers for the past 2 generations lack experience of appearing before a professional judge, and civilian police know nothing more than executing orders from the military. The opening that is today available in Burma must not be lost, and the experience of the UN in Cambodia should not be repeated. Next, in Sri Lanka, the debate on the new government's efforts in re-establishing the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law continues. The government's constitutional process has received mixed responses from the general public, with much criticism at its complacency in implementing the promised legal and judicial reforms and in dealing with corruption. Just Asia spoke with a visiting senior lawyer and a member of the People's Representation Committee on Constitutional Reforms, Mr. Sunil Jayaratna, on these issues. He explained the main challenges in implementing the said reforms and why public trust has been eroded.
The independence of judiciary was severely threatened, during the impeachment and the contemporary period. So that is why that there was a huge outcry by the people asking for the independence of the judiciary and justice, because whenever the people felt that that is at the last resort for the democracy and rule of law, judicial independence and the independent judiciary is the last institution they have to go for. So then that is why that people had a severe outcry. So however, I don't say that the present government or the system has taken adequate steps, but they have taken a very serious and meaningful effective measures and initiatives to do so. So one of them, I could say that the constitutional reforms, the parliament appointed a committee consists of 20 members from the different expertise to go into the matter of constitutional reforms by listening to people in various parts of the country. So that committee recommended several reforms, and also if you take that the UN Special Rapporteur on judicial independence and lawyers also have severely dealt, very thoroughly dealt on the matters of independence of the judiciary, particularly about the appointment of superior court judges, the appointment of officers of the Attorney General's Department, and several other areas like the police reforms. So now taking all together, 2016 the Bar Association in their 2016 National Law Conference specifically focused their attention on the law's delays. So then I could say that though there is no such set meaningful programs yet, they have taken certain meaningful initiatives to reform the system. There is a big criticism of the breakdown of the criminal justice system in Sri Lanka past more than a decade. There were sort of a lot of extrajudicial killings and arbitrariness of the police force and military. So those were the areas where it was under heavy criticism by people. So there should be strict measures. Now the reformation of the Attorney General's Department, improving their effectiveness, one of the measures as suggested, and also the improvement of the quality and the effectiveness of the police department. Those are the major areas which in the process the experts have proposed. So now in addition to that, there should be certain strict measures with regard to improvement of the systems, that the funding, capacity building, training, and so on and so. There are various measures to be taken with a holistic approach. You can't segmentalize and say that this portion, if we develop that, we can have good system. No, that is not the way. There should be a holistic, interconnected approach, and that should be led by the people in the government and also the top leaders in each and every institution. So then we can have a good system.
That is all for this episode of Just Asia. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia or www.ahlrc.asia/justasia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.